Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Harry Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Encore Business Group, and Rydan Investments.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant. Happy to bring this next guest on. We've got Randall from the Grind Line podcast. I really like their podcast and their podcast name because I feel like I try to do this with most of the hockey guests that I have, and I always come up empty because I always want to talk about names. I think that's such a big thing in hockey, and we've got a lot of hyphenated names. So I think part of what they need on the current Red Wings is they need a new line. We had the Grind Line. There's the Grind Line book from Keith Gave, who we've interviewed on the show. It was a great book, and you talked about some of the famous lines. I think we need a line that's named something. Don't you, Ryan?
I mean, I'd take a repeat of the production line. Does that count?
I mean, that's good. That's a classic one. He refers to that one in the books. That's like tier one stuff where like they were just so good that, okay, production line, they were all very good. But I like the ones that are a little bit kind of quirky. Like I think obviously you've got the country connection with the whole Swedish thing. I think there's something there, but then you've also got a lot of hyphenated names. So I feel like there's room for like the hyphen line or the acronym line. There's something there. We just have to get everybody in the same group, and then I think a line will develop there.
I'm just waiting for 5 Swedes so we can go with the Swedish connection or something like that. We had the Russian 5, Swedish connection. Just bring it all out.
Exactly.
You know, we don't got the goaltending Sweden part, but one can hope that maybe we'll see something crazy. We get Axel Sandin Pellikka in Grand Rapids making his way to Detroit. Bring him to Brinket. You got to add a few more pieces, but you can make it fun, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of pieces roaming around here. I want to talk about a few of those different things that you kind of talked about because there's a lot to talk about in the offseason. I was just listening to the podcast and in one of the more recent episodes, updating on everything. I think you were missing for that episode, so I wanted to get your takes on some of the things the other guys were talking about because it's been a busy offseason, but I wanted to start with what your grade would be of the offseason because we had a hockey-related show where we had a bunch of mainly folks that cover kind of the Griffins and a lot of the stuff here in the area, and I tried to have them grade, and we seem to have kind of a bunching of the grades here. So I'm curious if you kind of have the same grade. So if you had to grade the offseason so far for the Red Wings, what would you grade it so far?
I mean, from my point of view, it'd be like B minus C plus. There hasn't been any wow factor things to hit you in the face with. I mean, you could consider the John Gibson trade, I think, the biggest move they made of the entire offseason to this point. But outside of that, I mean, the draft was good. It wasn't great, wasn't underwhelming. It was for where they were at in draft positioning at 13 overall. They did what you would hope for. I think they solidified the goaltending piece, which we know for the last several years has been kind of their Achilles heel. Like they were riding and dying by what was in the crease, right? And you bring in John Gibson, who is perennial top 10. I mean, arguably, depending who you want to talk to over the last several years. Is he at that point right now? We'll find out. But, I mean, as a whole, it's hard to say. It's hard to give him a real bad grade, but you can't really give him a great grade, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's about in the mean of what we were talking about that week. I think it was mainly about a B on average, so that's maybe slightly lower. But I see the argument here because a lot of it depends on Gibson's health. I think that's the big move, and I thought you guys did a good job summarizing it on the podcast because you made what I thought was a good point because my frustration with the goalie situation up until this point has been the fact that it's been hard to kind of see what he's doing with the goalies here. He just keeps acquiring goalies and nobody's really better than another one. And the ones that are actually talented and have, I don't want to say talented, but have that future potential aren't maybe ready yet, like Kosa and Augustine. Yeah. And then you've got the guys at the major league level that are kind of all grouped in the same-ish category where they're NHL goalies, but they're more experienced. They're on the back side of their career, and you're trying to piece that together on their good nights when they're not injured, etc. Gibson's in that same category, but he's a little higher ranked in that category, I would say.
No, I would agree. I mean, you knew what you were getting with Cam Talbot coming in particular with the guys that are currently on the roster before the Gibson trade, right? But really, outside of that, to your point, you had a lot of fringe starters that Detroit's been kind of going through, and that can get you so far. I mean, we saw Alex Lyon, what he did. I think we talked about it previously, what he was able to help Florida do and get them into the playoffs, and then it went back to Bobrovsky, obviously. But it's a lot of help by committee, if you will. Cam Talbot's been the guy for a long time, but you've got a true higher tier goalie with John Gibson that, like you said, if he's healthy, makes this team, I think, defensively far better, because it always seemed like this past season, really the last couple of years in particular, you're always waiting for that one save, that one play from your goaltender to kind of give you a spark and or just help you maintain a lead. We know that there's been defensive struggles, but at the same time, it's what can you do with your goalie? And I think with Gibson, you got him for 2 more years under contract. You mentioned Kosa, you mentioned Augustine. Does that give one of those guys that extra little bit? I mean, I think that the cards are in Kosa's camp to try to figure out what the heck you're going to do, right, in Grand Rapids. So I think this is a big year for him developmentally wise, because he can come right in next season and be your backup. That's maybe best case scenario on my thought. And then you've got Augustine. He can leave Michigan State and make his way out to Grand Rapids and go from there. But Gibson, I think a lot is going to hinge on how well he can perform this year with a really unchanged defense for Detroit.
Yeah, I think that's the big point there, because I think it does align the goalies. Like you said, I can see how Gibson and Talbot become the main 2 goalies. Obviously, Talbot it doesn't have a lot of seasons left. He's aged fairly well, but yeah. he doesn't have a ton of seasons left if we're going off of kind of what normally happens. And then you've got Kosa and Augustine coming up, and so you can see Kosa being ready sooner, and then he backs up Gibson, and then by the time Gibson is on his way out, then Augustine's ready, and then maybe you've got 2 premier goalies at that point, and then you've gotten you've had them have the ability to learn from the other folks, including the new goalie coach, who hopefully will help this situation as well. Because I agree with you, you can shuffle the goalies around all you want, but I think the obvious, you study this stuff all the time. I do less, but I think the obvious point to most people that are even casual watchers is the fact that the defense is what needs to be improved.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to easily lean into Mo Seider, Simon Edmondson. There's no doubt about that. But what's very interesting is, do you see some of the prospect growth come through? I know there's a lot of people extremely high, and I'm sure you probably talked about this with the Grand Rapids guys, is Axel Sandin Pellikka. Is he going to be a player to watch as we go into preseason, as to one that could potentially make this roster out of camp? Because you want them to be better, but you don't want to necessarily risk anything, because you look at who's still remaining. I mean, Jeff Petrie gone. I think a lot of people are probably happy about that. It's a 2-way street with that one. But then you've got Ben Sherratt, Justin Hall, and Eric Gustafson, all 3 guys that are 33 plus. Depending on how you want to look at it, are kind of underwhelming. But they can do good in depth roles. But for a position that Detroit's in, there's a lot more expected. Like, you got Sherratt with Seider typically on your top pair. Justin Hall was probably the most polarizing defenseman on this team the past season. Like, what are you going to get at? If he's playing bottom minutes, I think you're okay with what he can provide. But that's also a spot where you would probably prefer Ben Sherratt. Eric Gustafson, this is a year where you hope that he's not seen, it doesn't remotely come close to what you saw from last season. He had a great 4 Nations. So you hope that maybe that can carry over. I'm sure maybe it was the Worlds I'm trying to think of, but you hope that what is there can come out. But at the same time, you want to see a Simon Edmondson elevate his game. You want to see an Albert Johansson elevate his game. 2 young players for this team to step up and maybe solidify that top four. But then the wild card is going to be Jacob Bernard-Docker, who's been kind of back and forth, and you're not really sure what you're going to get, but a good depth role player that could help this team moving forward. So what's on the main roster, you're not really sure what to expect. I'm hoping with the coach, when the coaching change took place back toward Thanksgiving, now you've got a full off season for them to implement their style of play with Todd McClellan. But yeah, I guess the positive for most fans is that you look at Sherratt, Hall, and Gustafson, like I mentioned, they're all on expiring deals. They're gone after this season unless something crazy happens. So there's change coming. It's just how long can you hold on for?
Yeah, that's the interesting part about this team is I can kind of see the duality of the directions that they could be heading, because there are some holes. They do need to improve the defense. You've obviously got the left wing situation, but there's the idea that I can see the internal development of the core happening here. There was development from a lot of players last year. You got a lot of young guys in the system. You mentioned some of them that could come up and buoy the performance of the big league team. But you've got to make sure those guys have enough seasoning before they get up there, and that they're actually better than the people that occupy those roles. But it's clear that some of those people need to be removed from those roles. But at the same time, people have a hard time waiting too, because that's been the mantra for a while now. And we, with our last guest, he joked that the last good year that the Red Wings had was 97. Obviously he was making a joke and exaggerating a little bit, but people are a little uptight and want this to develop because they're used to the Red Wings being a dynasty, which is what they are.
We're spoiled. I mean, it's simple as that. It sucks because you want to see a team like Detroit, especially going into their centennial year, being successful, right? But the fact of the matter is we've been waiting for all these good things to happen, but you're still looking at kids that are 18, 19, 20, and 21 years old trying to make it into one of the most difficult men's league in the world. And because we talk about this quite a bit on the podcast, like you look at the NFL, these guys getting drafted are 21 to 23 or even 24 years old. They've been going through the gauntlet, like NCAA for football, for instance. And they've built their bodies up. They've matured. They've come into their own. Hockey, you're waiting on all that to happen after you're drafted. Unless you're a generational talent like we just saw with Macklin Celebrini in San Jose, you go back to Connor McDavid, even Connor Bedard. Most of these guys, you're waiting for these guys to make an impact. And that's just the unfortunate reality that is hockey. Even with baseball, same way. You look at the Tigers. It took several years before we saw Spencer Torkelson and Riley Green hit the actual lineup. There's an extra level of patience that has to be there. And I'm not saying that we have to continue to be like, yes, we need to just continue, wait. But at the same time, like we're looking at Grand Rapids, for instance. We talked about Axel Sandin Pellikka. There's also William Wallander on the defense, Anton Johansson, Shea Boom. There's several players that are close, but not quite as ready to make that jump. They could, but at what cost? And then you're looking at a more difficult growing process for them potentially.
Ryan Randall of the Grind Line podcast. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.